This is All India Radio. Power of Listening. Under this series, tonight we take you on a journey to the world of yet another magnificent facet of the traditional Indian knowledge systems. I'm Manoj Mindkar. Zero and the decimal value system. In today's episode, we shall be focusing on this valuable contribution of India to the world. The expert on the show is Dr. Parthasarathy Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor in Mathematics, Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur, West Bengal, and writer. Stay tuned.
Suppose you have two pens with you and I ask you to give me one of your pens. And then I ask you, how many pens do you have now? Of course, you will say one. And then I request you to give me that pen as well. And then I repeat my question again. How many pens do you have now? Very likely your answer will be no pen at all. But look here. In response to a direct question, you took recourse to language, not number. Precisely this is where zero comes in. If you have to give your answer in an assertive mode using some number, then you have to say, I have 0 pens. Of course, in our everyday mundane life, we don't talk about zero like this. Zero is not a counting number. Zero is an invention of human intellect. It didn't come to us naturally like the other counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. That's why in mathematics, zero is not a member of the set of natural numbers. At a certain point of time in the history of human civilization, human had to invent the idea of this number zero representing nothingness mathematically. And we Indians often proudly say that it was in India that zero was invented. But exactly what is meant by this kind of invention? It was not excavated from underground, nor was it created in a laboratory. So what exactly is meant by this invention? What used to be there before there was zero? Also, it's an important point to ponder upon that there were so many other ancient civilizations, very rich in culture and science at certain particular point of time. They had their own enumeration system. Did they have zero? If yes, then why their zero is not considered in general as the progenitor of our modern mathematical zero? And if they didn't have zero, then how could they manage their counting? If that is an efficient way, then why bother about zero? So to know all these, you need to know about the natural history of zero. It's actually a history of human civilization across 5,000 years. All the ancient civilization from Egypt to Babylonia, Mayan civilization, the mighty Roman Empire, Greece, China, and of course, ancient India, wherefrom it was transmitted to Arab. It's a very engaging journey, and we Indians should know it from the proper perspective. Once you know the true story, you will see that no boasting, not an iota of braggadocio is needed to glorify ancient Indian mathematics. Zero was one of its original contribution, along with the place value system. Place value system is something where, for example, you talk about the number 123. When you write it in a place value system, you write 1, 2 and 3 side by side. But try to appreciate that the 1 you write here does not represent 1. It represents 100 because it's in the hundreds place. 2 here stands for 20 because it's occupying tens place. So every such symbol, they have 2 roles to play in a place value system. Its own intrinsic value and the value it occupies in a certain number through the place it is occupying there. And such a place value system in decimals, where you have only 10 symbols, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9, and this all-important zero was invented in India in remote past. I know, perhaps you are thinking that Aryabhata invented zero. This is a common misinformation among Indian folks. Aryabhata, his time is only 5th and 6th century. Experts have shown that at least 700-800 years before Aryabhata's time, the idea of this number zero was prevalent in India. The most concrete reference is found in Pingala Chanda Sutra, a book of Vedic prosody mainly, Vedic, where in the 8th chapter, 2 Shutras, Rupe Shunyam and Di Shunne, along with 2 other, Dir Ardhe and Tabat Ardhe Tadgunitam, these 4 Shutras together refer to a combinatorial calculation as early as in 3rd century BC, where this Shunyam, the reference to the number 0, is quite clear-cut. Even some 400-500 years farther back in timeline, you can refer to Ashtadhyayi, the Paninian grammar book. The linguist Panini, who was a structuralist, did a deep structure analysis of the then available words of Sanskrit and made a very systematic, a very mathematical presentation of the whole existing body of the then Sanskrit language. And in this grammatical approach of structuralizing, systematizing the whole thing, Panini used several techniques. One of them is called Adarshanam Lopaha. This idea of Lopaha, which technically refers to the vanishing of middle morpheme of certain numbers under certain situation, is very much close to the idea of zeroing down as we talk about in modern day. There is a nice book called Zero in Panini, which in its 200 odd pages technically shows all such references that can be found in the Paninian text. Even beyond that in timeline, even in the Vedic period, right in Rig Veda, you find over 3,000 Sanskrit names of numbers in decimal system. Starting from Eka, Di, Tri, Chatura, etc. All these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9. And then higher and higher, the largest number that you have a reference to in Rig Veda is Navatir Navashahasra, refers to 99,000 in various different contexts. But the nomenclature, the verbal analysis of that, the grammatical analysis of that quite clearly shows a prevalence of place value system. Like Shahasrani Shatadasa, 1,110. Shapta Shatani Vingshati, 720. Observe that if you suppress these place names and take the digits only, the coefficients, the number sort of pops up. Shapta Shatani Vingshati. Just drop that place name of Shatani. You get the number, 720. But that's in a written representation. Now this is a very important subtle point in history of zero in the Indian context. You must understand that at that time period, it was oral tradition. And in oral way of talking about numbers, even in decimal system, you don't actually require explicit mention of zero. For example, today, if I talk about 100, do I require zero? 1000, do I require zero? No, I require only when I want to write it down in decimal system, in a place value system. See, other systems, like Roman system, you write a symbol quite similar to C, capital C, and it stands for 100. This is not a place value system. Larger the number is, more and more new symbols you require in such a system. Such a system do not require zero. But when it's a place value system, absence of a specific numeral in some specific place, if you want to express it in writing, there you require the symbol of zero. So before India started writing, explicit mention of the number zero as a number in its own right cannot be found. But that doesn't mean that the idea was not there. A decimal system in oral tradition, if you analyze the vocabulary, its existence tells you that the system works only when you have this idea, nascent, tacit. When India started writing, initially it was in Brahmi or Kharashti as far as we know. These were Ashokan edicts, and I am not considering the Indus script for the time being in this discussion because those are yet to be deciphered. Once they are deciphered, maybe, who knows, the whole story, whole history has to be rewritten, perhaps. But right now, beyond Ashokan edict, we don't know much about writing in India. And that is a very unfortunate point as far as the ancient India and its history is concerned. Experts always tend to vary in their opinion. A written record of something is always more acceptable to everybody rather than this passive reference. Like the Babylonian clay tablets. Babylonians had a sexagesimal system, a system with place value in the base of 60, unlike ours which is only 10. And these basic symbols, like we need only 10 symbols, 1 to 9 and the symbol of 0. they needed 60 symbols, 1 to 59. And then that was a puzzle for the Babylonians for over 1,000 years. They never knew what to use for this absence of a symbol. 1 to 59 was cooked up in an additive manner by two basic symbols. But then the absence of any of this in a certain number, they tried to manage it by putting a gap at that requisite position. And that created lots of trouble. For example, in our modern day terminology, if I try to explain the Babylonian problem to you, it's like, suppose you don't know the idea of zero and you want to write in the modern way 101, 11 and 1001. What would you do? The Babylonian style? 11 is fine, 1 by the side of 1. What about 101? You leave a gap. And then 1001. You leave a gap between 2, 1. Now, who will assess this length of gap at a later point of time? When you are writing, you know. Suppose it's 1,00,001. How to assess the gap? How many places are there? That was a puzzle for over 1,000 years in Babylonia. Around 400 BC, some Babylonian genius came out with a new symbol. A symbol that's called a kind of somewhat like the less than sign that you see in today's mathematics. If you overlap partially one such sign over the other, it's somewhat similar to that Babylonian symbol of zero. That is the earliest known written symbol for zero in human civilization. But Babylonians failed to understand the true potential of this number in its own right. They kept that zero as a placeholder only. The more important role of zero is appreciated only in India. Like I told you the story of Babylonia, a similar story is there in the Mayan civilization, in their vigesimal or base 20 enumeration system. I'm not getting into that details today, but let me tell you this much, that the idea of this zero as a number perhaps was not unique to India. It was there in other civilizations. But experts now believe that nowhere else did it bloom into its fullest potential as a number in its own right. That is the number that you see when I write 2 minus 2 equal to 0. A number in the same footing with every other numbers. A number on which mathematical operations can be performed. In India, categorically, the rule for these operations, categorically this status of the number 0 was first expressed in writing by Brahmagupta. In Brahma's Futa-Siddhanta, in 7th century text, Brahmagupta is telling Dhanayor Dhanam, Rinam Rinayor, Dhana Rinayor Antaram, Shamoike Khom, which means two positive numbers, Dhana and Rina, the wealth and the debt. They represent the positive numbers and negative numbers in Brahmagupta's way of expression. And he says that sum of two positive numbers is still positive, sum of two negative numbers is negative. And if you sum up a positive and negative number of equal values, shamoike khom, that's going to be kha, 0. Incidentally, kha happens to be the most common parlance for 0 in ancient India. Kha means sky, akasha, ambara, gagana, and many other equivalent Sanskrit words were used to represent 0. And the list also includes Purna, Ananta, and many others. You know, those days were the days of prosody. Metrical need was there. That is why every number had various equivalent names. Technically, these are called Bhuta Sankhya. The most common for 0, Shunya, was Kha. And here you have Brahmagupta explicitly stating that a number minus itself is equal to 0. Or even more precisely, a number added to the negative of itself is equal to 0. Before him, we have Aryabhata, who is using 0 in his Katapayadi calculation of square root and cube root extraction. And he is explicitly in his book Aryabhatiya stating the basic principle of decimal place value system, telling that from one place to other, you need to multiply it by 10. Sthanat sthanam dasagunam swat. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the point where these things are discovered. They were there. We couldn't recover all our past through the written records. This far we could recover. This is the first known record that we have. Many of the manuscripts of ancient India are lying in various places in abroad and in India that still are not decodified properly. So an extensive study of this is required towards unearthing and understanding and specifically pinning down the timeline of these tremendous discoveries. Basham, in his book, The Wonder That Was India, he told that the inventions of which Europe is so proud today would never have been possible without a developed system of enumeration. And that would have never been possible if Europe was shackled by the unwieldy system of Roman numerals. Using Roman numerals, doing ordinary multiplication, division is a big challenge. The idea of this decimal system, along with the fantastic mathematics of Brahmasfuto Siddhanta, where Brahmagupta has solved some specific second-order indeterminate equation, nowadays known as Pell's equation, wrongly, of course. About 1,000 years later, this gentleman Pell came into the picture. Brahmagupta solved this equation by an excellent way, a principle devised by him called Vavana. Much later in Europe, the same principle were rediscovered. Such thing happened again and again. But unfortunately, we Indians are generally oblivious to our past. It is not that there are no people who are at the know, but they are only handful. Time has come for proper dissemination of this glorious mathematical past of India. Zero and decimal number system paved the path. That path actually was traversed by scholars like Aryabhata and Brahmagupta. And Brahmagupta initiated what is now called indeterminate equation, which is definitely a part of algebra. This book reached the court of Caliph Al-Mamun in Baghdad some 200 years later, and there it was translated as Ziz al-Sindh Hind by one Al-Fazari. Later, a court mathematician by the name Al-Khwarizmi did some work on it, translated, and with some further work on it, written a book, Al-Zabar wal-Muqabla, in short, from which later Europe translated it, Latinized it, and the word algebra came into being. And since Europe got it from Arabs, they had the wrong impression that this idea of decimal system and zero are actually Arabic invention. They called it Arabic numerals, but now it is being accepted worldwide as Hindu-Arabic numerals. Zero, the name itself, how it came into being, that's equally fascinating story. The original root is the Sanskrit word shunya, suna, yat. The word suna comes from the root shvi, which means in semantic extension something like hollow. It's not a hollow or vacuum in a negative sense. Rather, it's a womb-like hollow, ready to receive and swell. And as we have pointed out already, the most common name of this shunya, equivalent name, was Kha, and also Gagana, Akasha, Ambara, Jaladhara Patha, and so many others. Tuchha, Chidra. Incidentally, the oldest reference that we get is in Gopatha Brahmana. Chidram Kham iti yuktam. Chidra, the puncture mark, is Kha. The Brahmana is one of the ancient layers of Vedic scriptures. After the Sanghita, Brahmana, then Aranyaka, and then Upanishad. That's the, stage-by-stage development. So Gopatha Brahmana is quite an old text where you find this reference. The name zero, as I was trying to tell you, its history, the nomenclature itself. When this shunya reached the court of Caliph Al-Mamun and it was translated by Al-Khwarizmi, he used the terminology sifra, coming from the Arabic verb root SFR, which literally means nothing. Indian zero was not just this negative nothing, it was a dichotomy of nothing and everything. The shunya was also perceived as ananta, purna, this infinitude, the vast expanse of the sky. God himself was perceived as shunya as well as purna. This simultaneity, this dichotomy went completely missing in the Arabic translation. They got the negative idea of nothingness only and called it sifra. Later, in 1202, Fibonacci, the famous Italian, famous for his sequence, which also is an Indian invention. But that's a different story. Let us not digress. Fibonacci, Leonardo Pisano, that's its original name. When he has written the book Liber Abaci, the book of Numbers. He learned this system from the Moorish Arabs, traveling as a boy with his father in the eastern coasts of Africa, where he came into contact of this beautiful system. And when he wrote the book, he introduced this system to Europe. And there he translated this as Zephyram. Zero got the name Zephyram. It was not zero as of then. Zephyram literally means a very light westerly breeze. So light that almost you cannot feel it, almost insignificant. So you see that idea of nothingness prevailing. Later on, in Venetian dialect, Zephyram became Zephiro. And to cut short a very long story, this Zephiro gradually changed into French Zeho, Spanish Cerro, and English Zero, as we call it today. When this system reached Europe, prior to its Renaissance, it actually revolutionized European mathematics. This very system, and it is acknowledged by people like Newton, that this system of arithmetic operations on this doctrine, as Newton specifically mentions in one of his books, he says that I am so surprised that why didn't it occur to anyone before to use this in the case of polynomials. So polynomial algebra came into being, which actually is due to this timely historical intervention of Indian number system into Europe. The story goes long. Not only this zero and decimal system, so many other ancient Indian achievements, great achievements, were rediscovered and re-established few hundred or even 1,000 years after its origin in India by European mathematicians, and today they bear their names. I mentioned Pingala Chanda Sutra, a 3rd century BC text, where in the 8th chapter is amazing amount of combinatorial calculation that leads to conversion from decimal to binary and binary to decimal, in the sense of prosodical analysis, finding rank numbers and deranking. The matrix bed, the prostara, actually gives you the idea of binomial coefficient that goes by the name of Newton, and the so-called Pascal triangle as Meru prostara. An immediate consequence was the so-called Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci's time, I told you, is in 13th century early. And here I am talking about Birahanka, a later prosodist in Prakrit, in Britta Jati Shamuchaya, talking about the Matra Meru and Matra Britta, an analysis of that, counting numbers of variety of matras using that Laghu and Guru. He is giving a sutra which is essentially Sn is equal to Sn minus 1 plus Sn minus 2 in today's language, which is the generating formula of the so-called Fibonacci sequence. It's very unfortunate that these are still in our country used and referred to by the name of these Western mathematicians who actually rediscovered them after hundreds of years. Al-Khwarizmi is referred to as father of algebra, whereas Brahmagupta's mind-blowing work on algebra is not known to even the general Indian mass. So time has come that we should try to disseminate this among the young learners, our next generation, from the proper perspective, to inspire them, not for living in the past. Never. That is not the intention. That is not the purpose. The purpose is to inspire them, to know about the great achievements of ancient India in mathematics, so that they can motivate themselves for doing higher research to achieve new heights and accolades for their motherland. And towards this, a recent program by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, along with AICTE, the Ministry of Education, clubbed with the general ongoing program of 75th year of Indian independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and under the aegis of Dhara, an ode to Indian knowledge system. Recently they have organized a day-long seminar where experts from all over the world took part in telling various aspects, really mesmerizing aspects of ancient Indian mathematics in New Delhi. Before I end, I would like to draw your attention to one zero gallery that has been instituted in the Ramakrishna Mission Institute, in the Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur, Kolkata, where you may find a permanent panel exhibition depicting this 5,000 years history of human civilization. And also, I would like to refer to a YouTube documentary, Genesis of Zero, that was shown in the International Science Film Festival of India in Goa last December. For them who are interested in natural history of zero, you will find them interesting. Thank you.
Zero and the Decimal Value System. You heard the 25th episode of our all-new series on traditional Indian knowledge systems, Power of Listening. The expert on the show was Dr. Parthasarathy Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor in Mathematics, Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur, West Bengal, and writer. We hope you enjoyed it. This series has been conceptualized by Shashi Shekhar Vempati, CEO Prasar Bharati, and produced by Vinod Kumar. Special thanks to Amol, Parth and Randheer Thakur for their contributions. This episode is also available on our official YouTube channel, Akashvani AIR. Be there on the 25th of March, same time, same frequencies. This is Manoj Mainkar signing off from Delhi. Bye for now.